Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Formidable Opponents, a show that pits three people who have known each other virtually their entire lives in a series of conversations as we argue what is the best in a variety of fun, engaging, and critical topics we all debate about. Today, we are debating about best action hero. So today, Formidable Opponents will be taking you to the bank, the blood bank. And today, as always, I'm Randall, joined by Bob and Joseph. Guys, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, man. How are you? It's a nice day. It was actually a pretty good weather day. I'm feeling really good about this topic. Ready to go.
How about you, Bob?
I came here to chew bubblegum and kick ass.
Yeah, all right.
It looks like I'm all out of bubblegum. Ready to rock and roll.
Excellent. So today, guys, we're talking about best action hero. We're going to be arguing our choices. But before we do that, as always, let's talk a little bit about action heroes and the history of it. When you think of action heroes, I think of how the involvement, it sort of evolved from the 70s to the 80s. In the 70s, you had a lot of grimy, gritty, sort of gory movies, whereas the 80s, they became more popular. They were a lot more explosions, bigger budgets, bigger heroes, stronger heroes, and it just sort of evolved. And tell me a little bit about what you guys think makes a great action hero.
Okay, well, me personally, I always go with, I think of explosions, epic fight scenes, car chases, battle scenes or war scenes, heart racing, destruction, that kind of thing with those big climactic endings. The hero that is usually not what everybody expects, but it's a person that's there to save the day and kick some ass. They're not the superhero from the comic books. They're usually more complex, rough around the edges. They're tough. They're mean. They're usually batshit crazy, right? They simply don't give a shit. And that's what I think I love about these 80s and 90s type of action heroes, because they're kind of like the anti-hero, but the hero, because most of them are assholes.
I agree. And the person doesn't have to be this huge, larger than life. Nowadays, at least, doesn't have to be this huge, larger than life person, male or female. The character's got to have I think, a great story, questionable tactics, like I think Bob mentioned, questionable heart, whether or not, like he mentioned, is the anti-hero, action star. The movie's got to be good. The story's got to be great. Is the person fighting for something, personal, political, I guess? What's going to make this movie great? And that's something that I look for in a good action movie, besides the great explosions and fight scenes, I guess.
And there's always a pissed off.
And they also have to have a heart of gold.
A heart of gold, and a really, pissed off sergeant yelling at him for whatever reason.
That I'm too old for this shit.
Too old for this shit. They're always, batshit crazy. Now, I want to talk to you guys about something I've noticed a lot. The traditional action heroes, as we mentioned, it really reached its apotheosis in the 80s when you saw all these guys. Specifically, that was their niche. And the people we selected, or the actors we selected, fit in a very particular niche. But now when you see action movies nowadays, you got guys like Keanu Reeves, Tom Cruise, who weren't noted action heroes at the beginning of their careers. But now, I mean, you watch the John Wicks, you watch the Mission Impossibles, all great movies. But what are y'all's thoughts of these movies now becoming a sort of like, I got to do an action movie because it's just something cool to do. I want to spend 6 weeks training with the FBI or the Navy SEALs and do something cool, because you don't have really those niche actors anymore. It's kind of an open market right now.
I think it kind of hit like everybody wants that summer blockbuster hit, right? Everybody wants to have that really big movie during the summer. Action sells. When people are relaxing, enjoying their summers, they want to go to the movies and check out a big time action movie. The Independence Days, the Transporters, one of those big budget action movies, usually starring The Rock.
Yeah. What about you, Joseph? What are your thoughts?
Well, the new sort of action movies, it kind of touched up on Bob mentioned people want to see that. Nowadays, the big difference in them, you look at like the Avengers movies. I mean, I love them. I'm a comic book fan. I love the Avengers movies. I love the Iron Man movies. But that they're filmed in front of green screens. I'm not saying that they're not doing the training, that they're not doing they're not spending time in the gym preparing for these roles. But you see a big difference in that type of action, because like a movie like Endgame, a lot of that stuff was shot in front of a green screen. So those explosions and all that, great, laser gun fight stuff, it didn't really happen, and it's all computer effects. So there's a huge difference. I think nowadays that's one of the main things as far as difference in between nowadays action movies and those of yesteryear.
action movies nowadays, they're big budgets, so they want big names, and the bigger productions are exactly what you say. They're more sanitized. They're green screens. When we were growing up watching action movies, they were a lot grittier. I guess you could say they were a lot more low budget. You saw the flaws in the movie, but that's what made them charming. There was a charm about them because you knew you weren't going to get the best acting. You knew you weren't going to get stars that could do Hamlet or could do, something like a Paul Thomas Anderson movie like Tom Cruise can do, and he could do an action movie. You would watch people who would specifically be tailored for those types of movies. So you knew what you're getting. You knew you were going to get an action shootout. You knew you were going to get something that wasn't perfect, but it had its charm. And I think that's what Hollywood's missing nowadays. We don't have that charm anymore.
Well, with characters like, Dwayne Johnson, we do.
and his are very big budgeted. I think he falls into the category of sanitized. It's in a sort of way, it is a throwback, but it just feels very different. And I think that's when you have the machine behind it, when you have the money, it loses its luster a little bit. Popcorn movies aren't the same.
Well, long gone are the days of the Steve McQueen car chase scenes and the low budget films. And, Steve McQueen was a godfather, like in Bullet and in The Getaway. You don't see that anymore. Now it's all Fast and the Furious, but it's all like Joseph said, behind a green screen, it kind of loses its luster a little bit, at least in my eyes.
Although I'm not knocking them, though. I do enjoy them. I think they're great movies. If they come out great, they do. And if I like them, I like them. I'm not going to knock the fact that they're shot on a green screen. I'm sorry, Randy.
No, you're good. I was since Bob mentioned Steve McQueen, let's talk about some of our honorable mentions, people that we didn't select for our best action hero, but that were up on our list. Who are some of the guys you want to talk about, or girls, of course, women, men?
Well, personally, I honorable mentions that came to mind were Jackie Chan.
Yes.
Nonstop action, does his own stunts, some putting himself in danger, and I believe he's hurt himself pretty seriously a few times in doing this.
Yeah.
The dude's a legend in the genre that he does. Another one for me, big fan of Mila Jovovich. Saying that right. Big time female action star. I know, we have the Angelina Jolies out there, the Pam Griers. Angelina's done some action stuff, great, but I think Mila is the queen of this. She's been dubbed the queen of kicking butt. I fell in love with her as Lilo Dallas in The Fifth Element. She carried, you can say she carried the Resident Evil franchise. I do enjoy the Resident Evil films, and there is no Resident Evil franchise films without her. Stuff like Ultraviolent. Most recently, she's done Monster Hunter, a movie based on a video game, and she was actually in the Hellboy reboot. So Mila is just, she's up there. She does this.
Absolutely. Bob, what about you? Who are some of your honorable mentions? I know you mentioned Steve McQueen. Do you got a few others?
One of the first ones that comes to mind is Bruce Willis. Die Hard. That movie was his biggest film, I would think, still to date, and it's such a great action film. And he automatically popped in my head. Sigourney Weaver in Aliens. She fucking kicked ass in that movie. Bruce Lee. You can't talk about action movies without mentioning martial arts, and Bruce Lee was a huge part of the 70s. To be Enter the Dragon and all the other martial arts movies that he did were just so. I think that they led on. They built on, and they're the reason why we had the Jackie Chans and the more modern martial arts movies. One in particular that I wanted to mention that I thought was just amazing was Kurt Russell.
Mm-hmm.
Kurt Russell is such a great actor, and he doesn't look the part, but in his acting and his attitude and everything, he plays the badass in a lot of characters. He was Snake Plissken in Escape from New York and Escape from L.A. Jack Burton in Big Trouble from Little China, probably one of my favorite movies of all time.
They're remaking it with a rock.
They are.
Oh,
that's what I heard. That's what I heard.
I love
it. He was that they can't redo that movie. That's a fucking problem. They're trying to redo
movie.
Things that are perfect. You know what I mean?
I know you mentioned Bruce Willis, Bob. I thought about, him as a selection too, but I couldn't get over the fact that, in a lot of his movies talks real softly into the microphones and on the phone and over a walkie-talkie. And I couldn't get over that. I was like, why is this guy always got to talk so softly?
So you're saying you find him sexy?
Yeah,
that was too much sex appeal.
You tickled my earlobe on that one.
You're okay. Then you love that voice. If you brought it up, then that voice must do something for you.
Bob, were you? Did you have a few others? I'm sorry,
didn't bring up the voice. Just
Mel Gibson too. You can't talk about this genre.
Speaking of Mel Gibson, being batshit crazy. Speaking of batshit crazy,
yes,
Mel Gibson is probably one of the biggest action stars. From the earlier days, he had all his Mad Max and Road Warriors. The Lethal Weapon buddy cop one was fucking fantastic. Him playing the crazed, deranged partner. He was in Braveheart. He was in The Patriot. He was a great action star. Besides the fact that he's pretty nuts.
I also kind of thought about Nicolas Cage too, but yeah, I mean, he does have action movies, but sometimes the action is a little tamed, I guess, if you want to look to his newer, like National Treasure. I love the movies, but the action's not there.
I had a few written down that you guys, Jackie Chan, you can't go wrong with Jackie Chan. If somebody would have mentioned him and gone with that selection, that's a hard one to argue. The reason I didn't go with Jackie Chan, I remember first seeing Jackie Chan on the Cannonball Run, and then watching a mid 80s movie called The Big Brawl. And I didn't see a lot of Jackie Chan until Rumble in the Bronx. And then of course he came in with a lot of other movies. He was a little past his prime. So I didn't grow up a lot with Jackie Chan. Sonny Chiba is another one from Asia who's a martial artist. Just check out some of these Sonny Chiba movies. They're kind of freaky. Chow Yun-fat, who's awesome. Two of my favorite action movies, The Killer and Hard Boiled. If you guys haven't watched Hard Boiled, check it.
Is
yes,
awesome.
It's the best action scene other than the shootout in Heat, I would say, is the hospital shootout scene in Hard Boiled. So if anybody hasn't seen it, I think you can find it on YouTube. Linda Hamilton is another one.
Mm-hmm.
I know she doesn't have a strong history, but when she did Terminator 2, I mean, she was just ripped, ready, and she was impressive, and she was amazing. And it's
also,
funny that go ahead, Joseph.
No, I was just saying. I also think about Uma Thurman and her role in Kill Bill. I mean, I was just amazing. I want to call her an act. You know, I don't want to say because her movies aren't totally all action, not as much as like Mila or Linda Hamilton, like you mentioned. But that movie and her performance in that, I mean, awesome.
You know, Joseph, you mentioned Bruce Willis and his velvety, smooth voice. It's funny because we picked three people. We picked three actors with three fucked up voices. But before we get to those guys, I want to talk a little bit about a person of interest, Steven Seagal. Now, none of us picked Steven Seagal, but you cannot mention action movies without talking about Steven Seagal. Could I talk a little bit about Steven Seagal? Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, he's probably outside your window right now staring at you because he was fucking shooting.
With his ponytail. So Steven Seagal, people hated him. He's known to be a big time asshole. He's kind of like the person you don't want to be around, you don't want to work with. A little bit of background about Steven Seagal. He's a black belt in Aikido. I think he was a 7th Dan. So the reason he got started was he was a martial arts instructor for one of the biggest Hollywood agents in the country, Michael Ovitz. And Ovitz believed he could turn anyone into a movie star, kind of like a fucked up version of Pygmalion. So he took Steven Seagal, said, I could make this guy a movie star. And he did. And it was just genius. I mean, it was like he did these gritty sort of throwback movies, low budgeted, tough guy, and it worked. And he made him into a star. He was a bad actor. He was an asshole, kind of like Billy Corgan, but Billy Corgan was a genius. Steven Seagal wasn't a genius. The idea of Steven Seagal was genius. And it's just amazing how Steven Seagal had gone from one of the top action movie stars to nowhere, and it slowly happened. He kind of used his gi like most of us use our scales. The tighter the gi got, he just kept on wearing it, and he never went above anything other than above the law, right? What is your take on Steven Seagal? Because I'm baffled at his career. I think it's phenomenally interesting.
But does anybody know who killed Bobby Lupo? That's what I want to fucking know. For him being it, I know we had talked about this and we mentioned it. One of the funniest parts in one of his movies where he was in a coma for 7 years and he still wakes up and he's in shape. Yes. It looks like, the Italian Jesus or whatever. I honestly think that he did good. I mean, he looked like a lot of the movies he played a cop. He looked like a cop or a detective. One thing's for sure, he could fuck up a lot of people and break your wrist. I mean, that was like a signature thing. That's what I loved about his movies. It was always so comical and you could tell it looked fake, but he would break people's wrists and arms so fucking quickly. It was awesome.
It took John Candy to realign our alliance with Jamaicans after what Steven Seagal did to him in Marked for Death. I mean, the way he killed Screwface at the end, it was like, dude, you just completely fucked him up.
He had to kill him 3 different times. Remember, he had 3 different heads or some shit like that.
Oh yeah, that's true. Joseph, your thoughts on Steven Seagal?
I think he did it to himself. I mean, but but it's like what Bob mentioned. I mean, he relied on that too much, breaking people's wrists, and it's true what people say about him. That he was an asshole. I think we heard a story about it in one of John Leguizamo's Broadway comedy shows. Where
that's right.
He stumbles upon Steven Seagal on set, and he's apparently high at the time, and he runs into him, and Steven Seagal is like, "Hi, John," and he's like, "Oh, oh, hi. No, I don't get high, sir. And that Steven Seagal was apparently like there walking around going like, forget the director, I'm in command. If you have any problems with that, say it to my face. I dare you. I dare you. And then so like, yeah, I laughed at it too. But John Leguizamo, he says that he laughed at him because he thought he was joking around, but apparently, he wasn't. And apparently he punched him or judo kicked him or so. This is what John Leguizamo says. So from all I know about Steven Seagal,
he doesn't throw kicks. He doesn't throw kicks.
So Steven Seagal, I mean, he did it to himself. He was an asshole. I mean, it is what it is.
He is the most hated SNL cast host. There was he refused to do like skits where Hans and Franz said that they could, beat him up. He's like, I'm not going to do that. You can't find any of his SNL skits online. I think there's one with Chris Farley, and that skit was a total it was terrible. And you got to be a really shitty guy to make Chris Farley unfunny, and that says enough about Steven Seagal. Above the Law, Hard to Kill, Marked for Death, Out for Justice, and then when he did Under Siege, thank God for Tommy Lee Jones, because Tommy Lee Jones pretty much stole the movie from him. And I think that's when people started realizing we don't need Steven Seagal. We could go with other people. This guy is not worth the fucking headache. But he did make some great movies.
In your eyes.
Yeah, he had a nice little run there in the late 80s, early 90s.
And he had a wonderful ponytail. So let's go ahead and go to our selections. Bob, we're going to start off with you. Tell us who is your best action hero and why. Defend.
Well, we've talked a lot about some great action heroes and choices over the years, but I think there's no one that stands out more, in my opinion, than Sylvester Stallone. He's the best action hero of all time. I mean, the man single-handedly ended the fucking Cold War, right? So, I mean, you got to count for something.
Hearts on fire, yes.
Hearts on fire. Oh, man. Yeah, we'll get into that. Stallone, he fits all the action star criteria just perfectly. He looks like an action star. He can play the underdog. He can carry a franchise. And contrary to belief, he can actually fucking act. A lot of these guys, they're typecast into these roles, and they can't really fucking act. Stallone can act. As a matter of fact, I mean, he won a few awards for Rocky and for his acting prowess. He even actually won Best Supporting Actor in Creed. So the motherfucker can act, which is, I think, helps him stand above a lot of the other choices that we've mentioned. He can do it all, man. The guy can do it all. Besides figuring out the whole three seashells thing, he could be the leading man in an indie movie. He could be in a Moore movie. He could be the leading man in a box office hit, a cult classic film. Stallone's the man. He's your man for all those choices. He's acted in every single one of those types of movies. He actually made a fucking movie about climbing a mountain with John Lithgow into an action thriller, a summer blockbuster hit. Climbing a fucking mountain with John Lithgow, he turned into a blockbuster hit. I mean, if that doesn't say that he can sell tickets, that he can make a fucking movie exciting, I don't know what it is, all right? And he's had a ton of hits too, man. I mean, besides Cliffhanger, he's had Rocky, he's had Rambo, he's had Cobra, Demolition Man, Assassins, Judge Dredd, Tango and Cash. Love that one. Good buddy cop with Kurt Russell. The Expendables. I can go on and on and on. He has a ton of action movies, and a lot of them, if not most of them, hit. They were all hits, big time hits. So he really cornered the market in the action movie roles, and he's done it for the past 4 decades. That's probably the most impressive thing ever. Steven Seagal had his little run, and a couple of your choices that we're going to talk about in just a little bit, they had their runs, but Stallone has done it for 4 fucking decades. 4 decades. Okay, that's a feat it's crazy. It's unheard of for him to be making hit action movie after action movie after action movie since the 70s.
We'll talk about feet in front of Randy.
A lot of people yeah, there's not a lot of, I'm telling you, there's not a lot of action stars and actors that last more than 10 years, and this guy's done it for over 40. It's amazing to me. And not only that, but he's been the lead character in 3 different franchises. There's no other action star that can say that they've been the lead character in 3 different franchises in 3 different decades. He had Rocky, of course, Rambo franchise, and then in the 2000s, he created the Expendables, which is another big blockbuster hit, and they had 3 movies. So it's just so crazy to me that anybody could think anyone else could be a bigger action star than Sylvester Stallone, because he's done it all for so long. He's created all these memorable characters and iconic roles, and none other more important than Rocky. I think Rocky is that once in a generation character and role. He played that so perfectly, and he was so relatable, and you're rooting for him the entire time. This is his big underdog role, and really pushed him into superstardom, where he became that action star icon. Plus, I think those Rocky movies were more than just about explosions and kick-ass fight scenes and fights to the death. There were huge battles. It was about overcoming adversity, and you're fucking cheering him on. And the great thing about Rocky 1 is he loses at the end. That's what makes it so special. I think that first movie into that franchise made it perfect. He is the fucking hero. He is the man you're rooting for him all the way, and he loses. He loses in that first film, which makes it, I think, more impactful than, you know, all these other superheroes that win. And the entire Rocky franchise, it was great, and it had some big hits. Rocky 2 was amazing. Probably the best ending scene in any sports movie, and I'll argue that shit to my death, when Apollo and Rocky both hit the ground in the last round, and you're fucking, even though you've seen the movie 20 times, you're still like, get up, motherfucker. You're still begging for him to get up before Apollo Creed does. I mean, in Rocky 4, of course, he goes to the Soviet Union and Russia to fight Ivan Drago. That was great. Yes. That movie is fucking awesome because it brought us the 80s montage, baby.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't be the 80s montage. A
few of them, actually.
Workout montage, man. It made everybody want to get ripped. It fired you up. You could be watching it at 10:30 at night with your girlfriend, and you want to go outside and go for a run. And because there's no easy way out, man. We all know that. There's no shortcuts home, right? He's just an icon. I feel like he's sitting on top of the mountain, and he's just untouchable. I don't know. What do y'all think?
I think a few things before we really delve into one of my favorite memes. And I just thought about this when you mentioned Rambo. Is there's a meme I've seen a few times, and it'll say like what gym teachers look like today, and they'll have like a picture of Emma Watson or whoever, and what gym teachers look like when I grew up, and it's like Sylvester Stallone looking like Rambo. So I just wanted to get that up. I was just thinking about that. I will give you this. Stallone can act. He can act. He's an awesome actor. He can act as Rocky. Outside of Rocky, I don't know much other than maybe Copland, which wasn't an action movie. I don't know much of his
Get
action.
Carter.
Get Carter. You know, I listed a few of his action movies here. Obviously, Rocky and Rambo are classics. They're unassailable. Can't argue those. Cobra, I liked. Demolition Man, I liked. Judge Dredd, didn't like. Cliffhanger, no. Tango and Cash, no. Over the Top, no. Daylight, no. Lockup, no. Specialist, no. Stop or My Mom Will Shoot, hell no. Assassins, no. Get Carter, no. And Driven, no. So I'm looking at this, and I'm seeing, I just listed about 12 movies there, and there may be 4 movies that I really enjoy. Now, granted, the Rocky world has a ton of movies, right? So now you're saying, well, it's not 12 movies, it's really 20, because if you add Rocky and Rambo, those are huge franchises. I get that. He's amazing in Rocky and he's amazing in Rambo. He's got those niche, those are built-in audiences. He's done a hell of a job with them. But outside of those 2 characters, I'm not a big fan of Stallone movies. I think he's a great guy, seems like a nice guy, does his own stunts. I think what has helped Stallone is the sharp rise of nostalgia. Now that everybody's saying, okay, let's go back and let's watch the Creed movie. So he's coming back as Rocky. We're talking about the old action movie. So let's bring about the Expendables. I think he's benefited from that nostalgia because he was such a huge part of our childhood and of the 80s, and he was the predecessor to like Brain Damage. When you know, we were watching the Rocky movies, he brought attention to that, although they didn't really talk about it. But I just don't see Stallone. He's amazing. I love Sly Stallone's movies. But as far as action hero, he's definitely in the top 3 or 4. I just don't think he's the best because his library of action movies just falls flat outside those, you know, Rambo and Rocky movies. Joseph, what do you think? And Bob, you could feel free to respond as well.
I mean, I love Stallone. Stallone does some great movies. But before Rocky, he had 16 films to his credit. We all know that he didn't actually become a star until his porno was released.
Do you have that on Betamax?
He was bright shining star.
he wasn't Rocky. Stallone. His first starring role, like I said, 16 films to his credit. First starring role was as Rocky Balboa. Rocky Balboa. You talked about it, Bob. It's a great story about, and he loses in the first one, overcoming. What's the word? I'm sorry. Overcoming adversity. There you go. Thank you. And I know he did Rambo, but he will always, what made him a star? Rocky. What is Rocky? Rocky is a sports movie. If you think it's not. Boxing is a fucking sport. I mean, it's a fucking sports movie. It has a great story. I love the Rocky movies.
So you would say sports aren't action?
There's not action movies. There's sports movies. Hold on. Hold on. I know. No.
When he's driving his Porsche, it's definitely action because he shifts 28 times down a curvy hill. But go ahead.
I know.
But it's just like saying, Aliens is not an action movie. It's a sci-fi movie. Terminator is not an action movie. It's a sci-fi movie.
We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that.
I agree.
Let me finish. Let me give. Look,
I agree. Go ahead.
Look, he's great.
Yeah, there should be crossover.
Rocky is up. Excuse me. Stallone is up there as one of the top action stars. He's not. I don't put him up as high as some of the ones that we mentioned, an honorable mention or my pick, because of that. He's going to be forever known as Rocky. I know he has John Rambo. John Rambo can't hold Dutch's jockstrap. Rambo was out there hunting people in the jungle with face paint on. Arnold was as Dutch. Oh, I just revealed my pick. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
You could Dutch is out there hunting fucking alien predators from another world, and an ugly motherfucker at that. Stallone. The only reason Stallone did Rambo was because of the other movies that were out there, like Predator. So Stallone.
Rambo was actually made because he's a Vietnam vet struggling with some kind of mental illness from coming back and struggling to reassert himself into society. So it was him actually losing his shit. It actually talked a lot about mental illness and him going into it's like back to war when he goes into the woods. But it had nothing to do with Predator. Now, here's my big argument against that too. You talk about Dutch and Predator and he was in how many fucking Predator movies was Arnold Schwarzenegger in? One. That wasn't a fucking franchise.
It was enough.
It wasn't his fucking franchise.
It didn't need to be a franchise.
Danny Glover.
No, there was only
that's what I'm saying.
There was only two.
Rambo had Rambo 1, Rambo 2, Rambo 3.
It should have stopped after Rambo 1.
Rambo had 3 plus. No, Rambo 2 was fucking good, and so was I think Rambo 2 was a lot better than Rambo 1.
But
was awesome.
Besides all of that, like I said, he's more. I mean, literally, the Rocky movie's great movie. I love the character. I love the series. I love the franchise, like you say. But that's what he's always going to be known to me as Rocky, and that was a sports movie.
Bob?
Yeah, I completely disagree. He's had a lot of different characters, and like I said, he's the only one that's carried 3 fucking franchises. You know what I mean? So obviously, he's doing something right. He's actually doing something right. A lot of the picks that we're going to be talking about are ones that we mentioned, the honorable mentions. I mean, other than Keanu Reeves, I don't think of anybody else has even 2 franchises.
But is he doing something? Is he doing something right, or is he going back to the well because he has nothing else to do?
That was my point. That those two franchises. Go ahead, Bob.
But those 2 franchises were from the 70s and 80s. He wasn't going back to the well. He started the fucking well.
Can you defend Stopper? My mom will shoot.
Yeah, everybody has a shitty movie. Like Joe Pesci did. He shot Goodfellas the same year he shot Home Alone.
Those are great movies.
He had Kindergarten Cop.
Oh yeah, Kindergarten Cop.
John Claude Van Damme did a movie with Dennis.
Hey, wait a minute! Now stepping in. We're gonna. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and segue to the second pick. Joseph, who do you got?
All right. So I wish we had licensing rights for this one, because each individual that we're talking about, all 3 of them have some great movies with a great song playing in the background. I mean, clearly we just talked about Stallone with Rocky and No Easy Way Out and all that. I wish we had one. I wish we could do this for my pick, because right about now you'd be hearing dun 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 dun. That's right, baby. My selection is the man, the myth, the twin, not identical though, Arnold fucking Schwarzenegger. That's right, everybody. Make sure you pronounce that right though, because we don't want to have any croachy debacles. It's Schwarzenegger. It's Schwarzenegger, not Schwarzenegger, not Schwarzenegger. This isn't Spaceballs, okay? So born in Austria, Arnold at a young age, he knew he wanted to be Mr. Universe. Looked up to Reg Park and his career as the multi-time Mr. Universe winner who went out to star as Hercules in 4 films. He actually read a cover story about this and decided this is what he wanted to do with his life. He wanted to come to America, make millions of dollars doing the movies. I'm sorry, it's going to be hard to get through this without going into an Arnold voice.
I knew you were going to do his voice. Go ahead.
He wanted to come to America, make millions of dollars doing movies, and be this larger than life iconic figure. I mean, literally, I mean, the motherfucker was jacked back then during his film career and during his bodybuilding career. I know there's talk of there's some stories of steroid use, but that's not what I'm here to focus on. I'm here to talk about his movie career. He got his first starring role in 1970, excuse me, as Hercules in New York, a film about the divine hero who journeys into New York after being sent by his father, and many escapades ensue. Funny fact about this movie, though, is his accent was so thick and his name was so hard to pronounce that they changed it to Arnold Strong, and they actually overdubbed his voice. So that's actually funny. It was
Gilbert Godfrey did the overdubbing.
It was actually, I couldn't find it. It was uncredited. If you're fucking joking with me.
Yeah.
You asshole. No, I tried to find out who it was because I watched it and I was like, this is so bad. Why didn't they just let him talk? Anyway, although it was his first role, and it was billed as a fantasy comedy. And for most of the 70s, his roles were they were considered minor, and they were also part of other comedy films. And it wasn't until 1982 he got his first first starring role as Conan the Barbarian. And this is where it begins, ladies and gentlemen, the birth of Arnold action star. And I say star because one of his most iconic action roles is actually not a hero, depending on how you look at it. So, but I'll get into that right now. Conan was a bloody mess. Way before the use of CGI effects, which is great. Some of the scenes that come to mind are the Battle of the Mounds, nothing but Conan swinging his battle axe, mowing people down from the ground as they ride by on horses. The epic sword battle up on top where he cuts down his opponent. Great stuff again. Early in the film industry, before CGI effects and before everything was choreographed, like we've mentioned, we see today a lot of the actors doing intense martial arts training, weapon training before a film. This was just Arnold and his crew, lacing up their boots, going out there and going to war. It was great stuff. It earned him worldwide recognition. It led to a sequel, Conan the Destroyer, being his next film. And after Conan, he took the title role and iconic role as the Terminator for James Cameron. The Terminator, I think I've said Terminator enough. Anyway, I don't need to tell you about this one. I don't need to tell you about the plot of the movie, because if you're here for this podcast, then you've seen it. And if you haven't seen it for some reason, please go out and do so. I will say this film gave us one of the most iconic, most memorable lines in cinema history. And you know which one I'm talking about. It's the "I'll be back." Although he told Cameron that he wanted to play the hero in the film because the Terminator only had about 24 lines, James Cameron knew what he was doing. And boy, did it work. I mean, this movie did everything right. The action, the story, the fact that even though he was the bad guy, you were almost rooting for him. I know some people they were like, who's this fucking guy, Kyle Reese? Fuck him. He's a pansy, go get him, Arnold. Fuck this story. Fuck the future. Go get him. We like Arnold. He's that anti-hero. We love him. He's that larger than life character. And anyway, like I said, this film was great. It did everything right. It solidified Arnold as a bankable, bona fide action star. And the film itself was actually selected by the Library of Congress and preserved in the National Film Registry. But it's not just the action. It's not just the explosives. It's not the guns. It's not the weapons that make Arnold the greatest action star of all time. It's the goddamn one-liners and cheesy quotable lines. And for proof of this, look no further than his film Commando. Some of the cheesiest, greatest one-liners I've ever heard in a movie. Like when he drops the guy off the ledge and says, "Remember when I promised to kill you last? I lied." I mean, this shit. I mean, it's
the best part of that movie.
The greatest fucking film ever with action.
When he's throwing the saw blades at those fuckers.
Yes, the saw blades
at the fuckers and slicing their heads off.
Chopping them off. I mean, like it's great. There's action, and you can't forget about those one-liners. I mean, when he kills that guy on the plane and covers him up with a jacket to make it look like he's sleeping, and he tells the flight attendant, "Please don't disturb my friend. He's dead tired." I mean, come on. To this day, Commando is continually appreciated for its nonstop action, explosive practical effects, and cheesy quotable one-liners. The best one of them all that I haven't mentioned is is when Bennett gets impaled by the steam pipe, and he says, "Let off some steam, Bennett." I mean, come on, it's great. I mean, it's fucking Arnold being peak Arnold. But aside from all this, it's Arnold's ability to bring nonstop action to a wide range of movie genres, whether it was the comedy action with like Twins or Last Action Hero, or the sci-fi action with Terminator, Running Man. It's a great movie that I didn't mention, or Total Recall, or even like horror sci-fi action, depending on how your opinion of End of Days. He is and always will be Hollywood's most iconic, memorable action star of all time. Unless his lookalike love child follows in his footsteps, then we'll have to see what happens, because I mean, that kid looks just like him.
I was gonna say, so Twins is a comedy action, but Rocky's not an action movie. Get the fuck out of here. Get the fuck out of here.
Rocky's a sports movie.
I'll tell you this.
It's a chick flick, actually, the first one. But go ahead.
Let me just say this. That my biggest argument against you is what you just used. There's a reason why Arnold is all one-liners, because the motherfucker can't act. He can't read. He can't fucking act. That's his whole big thing. That's the reason why he has so many one-liners, because they're all fucking monotone.
You think anybody can understand what Stallone is saying?
Dude,
they both need closed captioning. I think all three of ours.
Yeah, for sure. But Arnold Schwarzenegger, he can't act. That's why he's all one line wonders. When he finally learned English and started acting well, he was already way past his prime. He was already the fucking governor. You know what I mean? And he only created that one franchise, the Terminator franchise. And even then, it's the biggest badass in the movie. It was fucking Linda Hamilton. It was Sarah goddamn Connor. I think she stole a lot of the spotlight from him in that movie. And again, that's my biggest knock on him. Arnold is a legend. He's iconic in all those great things. He is the biggest action star. He looks like the biggest action star. You know, he was Mr. Olympia and all that. But the reason why he had a lot of his, he was all looks. I think he was all look and show rather than substance. What do you think, Randy?
Your pick couldn't get him in Expendables 1, so he got him in Expendables 2, and now he's in those movies. Your pick wanted him because he needed him.
I love both the picks. I will say this.
Well, he didn't need him in Expendables 1. They made Expendables 1, and they paid for a whole franchise, and they were able to make 2 and 3.
Yeah, the only reason those are successful is because Dolph Lundgren's in them.
Yes, everybody's on Social Security in those fucking movies. So I don't think we're going to argue the Expendables at this point, because all of our picks are in the Expendables. You know, the funniest line I've heard about Arnold Schwarzenegger, it was from comedian Bill Burr. He said, "Look at the way he talks. He sounds like he should be unloading trucks in Transylvania." And he was a governor of a state he couldn't pronounce. Little fun fact about Arnold about Terminator: O.J. Simpson was considered for the role of the Terminator, but James Cameron didn't think he'd be believable as a killer. So he went for Arnold Schwarzenegger, who is apparently more believable. I do like Arnold a lot. I think he's. I was listening to a lot of interviews. He was praising everybody around him. He praised his co-stars, stuntmen, directors. He's a nice guy, and his story is so inspiring because here was a guy who came very poor from Austria, came to the United States, fulfilled all his dreams. I mean, he became a well-known movie star, action star, politician, bodybuilder. He wasn't afraid to fail, and he's just an inspiration. Now, but I know it's not about his biography. It's about if he's the best action star. I mean, he's great to his housekeeper. We know that. And we know he's in on his joke, but I always felt his movies were very formulaic. Now, one of the things you mentioned a lot, Joseph, are his one-liners. They're great. But to me, I think when you oversaturate a movie with those little all these action movies have bits of comedy, and you need that comic relief, but it always was very formulaic for me. It always felt like this is going to be a continuum of every movie. Arnold, he's shirtless, then he's going to kill somebody, he's going to say something funny, he's not going to do a lot of hand-to-hand combat.
Who's your daddy and what does he do?
Exactly. And he doesn't, his combat scenes were very disguised. He was just very the aesthetics of Arnold Schwarzenegger were what we were looking for, not so much his action, because yes, he is in action movies. He is in big, shoot 'em up movies. But when you really think about it, it was more the movies than it was the actor. I always felt that the movies were bigger than he was, but his star was bigger because that's who we like looking at. That's who we like listening to. He was funny. He was charismatic, but I never felt like he was the biggest action star. I always felt like he just fit these prime roles of these big budgets and what we wanted to see and listen to.
I disagree. I disagree.
Would you like to conclude?
I completely agree, Randy. Like a lot of his movies were all, the big explosions, the badass action scenes, and all he had to do was fucking stand there, all muscular and huge, because he looked the fucking part. He looks the part big time, and not saying that he was a terrible actor. He's one of the best action stars of all time. It was just all one lines. Like I said, he was all one liners, a lot of show, but a little bit of substance.
Joseph, you want to conclude with anything?
I disagree, man. If we're talking about all time action hero star, you got to have that. We can't just think about like, and I know all our picks are more of the seasoned actors. When we didn't pick anybody more recent, but they did have movies and careers that spanned into early 70s or late 70s, 80s, into the 90s. So they spanned a whole couple of decades. Back then, with the way action movies were done back then, there is no one better than Schwarzenegger. He was, when you think of all-time action movies, he did everything in those movies that everybody wanted to see throughout that whole time.
I was going to go ahead and move on to my pick. I wanted to go last for very strategic reasons because I felt like my pick was going to be the least popular. I felt this is going to be a dark horse pick. So I went ahead and I went with Jean-Claude Van Damme, the muscle from Brussels. I love Van Damme. We all loved him. Let's give you a little history about Jean-Claude Van Damme. He studied ballet in his youth.
He was say it like that.
I am going to say it just to piss you off. He was 18-1 as a fighter in his youth. So we knew he could fight. So finally, somebody who's not acting as a fighter. Many of his low budget movies made millions. Now, we all knew Jean-Claude Van Damme from Bloodsport, 1989. With what the hell was he doing in this movie, Forrest Whitaker? The story was about Frank Dux, who he portrayed. And Frank said he couldn't fight, but then again, Frank was a compulsive liar himself. Dux is one of the most well-known con artists of the martial arts. Anything that man claims is a big lie. So calling other martial artists fake is a projection at its finest. So Frank Dux went to the same karate tournament where Steven Seagal got his CIA training, apparently. And Bloodsport was the original Fight Club. Before there was Fight Club, there was Bloodsport. And we all love that movie. We all quote it. It is fantastically low budget. And some might say it's bad, but it's so rewatchable. It's so much fun. And it's one of those movies that you can't get enough of. I'm going to read a few of Jean-Claude Van Damme's movies. Cyborg, Kickboxer, which was it ended up being a franchise. He didn't star in any of the other movies other than I think the last one. It was a straight to video juggernaut. Shout out to Cody from Step by Step because he was one of the kickboxers. Lionheart, Death Warrant, Double Impact, Universal Soldier, where he challenged Dolph Lundgren to a real fight. They broke it up, of course. Nowhere to Run, Hard Target with John Woo. That was the movie where he grabbed the snake. I don't mean that as a euphemism. Time Cop, Street Fighter, where he had an affair with Kylie Minogue, which he liked to brag about, which is kind of a jerk thing for him to do, but we're not talking about his personal life. Sudden Death, The Quest, Maximum Risk. And here's where the wheels fall off. Double Team with Dennis Rodman, 1997. He did Knockoff. He didn't Recover, Legionnaire. So from 1989's Bloodsport to 1996 Maximum Risk, he didn't have the decades-long fame that Schwarzenegger and Stallone had. He didn't have that. I will give you guys that. You guys could argue the longevity. Fine. You guys win in that argument. But when you're talking about action movie heroes, somebody that really captivated a zeitgeist, somebody that really captivated an era, those 7 years I would put up against anybody's 7 years. I thought Jean-Claude Van Damme, not only was he entertaining, he danced in many of his movies that we saw him. He had a competitive karate career. He had a small part in Breaking where he was actually dancing. He was supposed to play the Predator, but complained that the monster suit was too hot. He couldn't move around and do his kung fu moves. He was considered for Simon Phoenix in Demolition Man, which would have been great, but I love Wesley Snipes in that movie. And he was considered for Mike Chirito in Heat. That was I forgot the actor's name, but he's the guy that had the line, "The action is the juice." Could you imagine Jean-Claude Van Damme saying that? The action is the juice. No, anyway, he wanted to fight Steven Seagal for real. In 2008, I'm going to give you guys a quick story. Sylvester Stallone declared to the British magazine FHM that at a party in my house in Miami in 1997, Van Damme was tired of Steven Seagal claiming he could kick his ass, so he offered to fight Seagal outside in my backyard. According to Stallone, they almost have been fucked up. Seagal made his excuses and left while Van Damme tracked him down at a nightclub and challenged him again. Stallone finished off by saying Van Damme was too strong. Seagal wanted none of it. The guy can crack walnuts with his ass. He was charismatic and photogenic. His daughter's a martial artist. The one thing that I will say, and that I feel it's very important to mention, he did battle through depression. He gave people who suffered a voice. He was on a 10 gram per day cocaine habit, which was about $10,000 a week. And this is not glorifying him at that moment. I felt like had he not succumbed to, had he had help with his mental health issues, with his drug abuse issues, I think we could have been talking about Van Damme in the same sort of legacy as Stallone and Schwarzenegger. As I mentioned, their legacies are bigger. There's no disputing that. But what I love most about Van Damme is that once he reached his apotheosis, he completely lost his sense of awareness. And even though it's a bad trait in general, it worked for him in the movies. Yes, he wasn't a good actor, but what I think I don't think believed that. I think it added to him portraying the drama in a comical way. Every time we saw Van Damme in a movie, he was always acting his heart out, where, Stallone and Schwarzenegger and some of these other guys were mailing it in. They were like, okay, I'm just going to say my lines and get out. Van Damme was always acting like if he was like in a streetcar named Desire, like, those dramatic no's. And yes, he wasn't a good actor, but he put his heart and soul into the acting. He put his heart and soul into the martial arts, into the choreography, into learning different weaponry. And that's what I feel makes him the best action hero.
Well, first off, what the hell is a dim mock? I fucking, that's a death touch, obviously. Speaking of the three that we mentioned, out of the three, Van Damme is actually my favorite of the three as far as action heroes. Growing up, I saw Bloodsport and Kickboxer over and over and over and over again. And whenever we get together and drink, I can hit every line after line in funny situations. And I love how you say he acted his heart out. Why'd those guys try to hurt me? Yeah, it sounded like he was really going for that.
I said he was a bad actor, but he tried. God help him.
But I mean, all his characters, they're likable. He plays that badass. Like you said, you were like, yeah, he knew martial arts. He was a badass in real life, although his security guard did beat the shit out of him.
Chuck Zito, yeah.
Bodyguard.
Yes.
Yeah, Chuck Zito beat the shit out of him at one point in time, so maybe Steven Seagal had a shot, to grab a wrist or something. But I feel that they have a couple of knocks on him. And yeah, he had that nice run from 88 to about 95, 96. He made a ton of action movies. I watched them all, especially the one with him biting the tail off the snake, which was fucked up for all sorts of reasons. But I honestly think that he made a big mistake because he typecast himself into a certain role, and he actually made the same movie 4 different times. Bloodsport, Kickboxer, Lionheart, The Quest, they're all kind of have the same premise, the same kind of tournament, the same kind of, and I think that kind of hurt him because it was the same fucking movie. Different titles, obviously different titles, but I think that hurt him because he was typecast into that specific type of character, fighting in a martial arts tournament or fighting in a tournament to see who's the best. He did have a hell of a run. I loved a lot of his movies. I think he fucked up once it became a novelty by doing a movie with Dennis Rodman.
Oh yeah,
I think it was all downhill from there. Yeah, I know Joseph at one point mentioned Stallone and his porn, his porn acting. I crack up because half of goddamn
he texted me the link.
Movies were all porn titles: Double Impact, Hard Target, Double Team. I mean, Jesus Christ! I think they would have been more fitting if Stallone was playing those roles.
Oh yeah, Double Team. Yeah,
instead of Van Damme, they all sound dirty, man. They're all dirty. I love Van Damme, and I love those movies that he did. And it's a real big shame that if you did, like you had mentioned, he had a really bad coke problem, and was spending a lot of his time and his money on drugs. And he really could have had a great career, and he was extremely likable. His movies were all badass. He did fit that underdog. He did the leading man role. I mean, he even played himself in Double Impact. He played himself twice, right? He played twin brothers, and he was a good actor. He really was. Like I said, he tried his best. I really liked a lot of those. They fit those badass late 80s, early 90s mold of action movies that are my favorite. But I think he fell short because the run was a little short, and because a lot of his movies were kind of the same, had the same premise. What do you think, Joe?
I think Van Damme at the time, I mean, you'd have to go back and look at the movies side by side, as far as dates and everything. Van Damme was making his movies around the same time that Arnold was already this, established box office star. But if you look at the movies, a lot of the same types of movies, if you look at side by side, Time Cop and Universal Soldier, two sci-fi type action movies. You talk about I know you, Bob, more than Randy, I think, mentioned about Arnold and his one-liners. Van Damme, he kind of, he had some one-liners himself. He had to. He kind of. I look at Van Damme, and I think he wanted to maybe follow the same career path as Arnold.
Maybe
Van
that's
Damme.
fair.
Van Damme had his own one-liners. Like I mentioned, like I'm in Time Cop. I'm still kicking. I must be on Broadway. Like what the fuck is that? He had his own
countertop splits. Go ahead.
And that's another one too. I can do splits because of my my muscular legs, and I do karate. He had his own things. Bloodsport, his most famous role, like you mentioned, is about his Fight Club before his Fight Club, so underground fighting. I don't think a movie about fighting necessarily makes it an action movie. We'd have to go a deep dive on what we define as an action movie. And if you want to say,
he was really twins on this one. Yeah,
that's comedy action.
But you gotta have. I think fighting and even
I know fighting is part of a sports movie. Yeah. But what was Bloodsport? His most famous. It was just an underground fighting movie. It's not an action movie. Unless you believe Karate Kid's an action movie, and then you put it in that. Well, it's not.
It's a so then Bruce Lee's Enter the Dragon, that's a martial arts movie.
No, but
that's not an action movie.
No, you got to. It's like I mentioned, we have to define what we actually believe. Then is an action movie.
Martial arts action movie. That's what we have to say.
I think so. I think they're one and the same. I think they're one in. I think there's a lot of crossover. Well. Just like you could have a comedy and a dramedy. I think you could have action, sports, action.
I believe you can cross the genres in movies, like we mentioned, the sci-fi action, the comedy action, the horror action. But what about it makes it the action? Is it simply just fighting, or do we have weapon use? Do we have explosions? Do we have helicopter scenes, car chases? Like
there were explosions in Twins.
I think there's so many things. I think it's self-defined. I think you could go on, and it's one of those things where you have to define it. You have to look at it and say, because I think what you're thinking, action movies, I don't think it's all about shoot 'em ups. I don't think it's all about chases. I think it's about everything. It's hand-to-hand combat. It's stylistic death scenes. It's gore. It's blood. It's so many things. I think you could even consider some horror movies action movies. I mean, I know you're really crossing a very thin line there, but I think there's a lot of crossover between sports, martial arts, and war to call them action movies. That's just me, though.
Yeah, I agree.
People could disagree.
I agree. I think it's a very broad spectrum when it comes to action movies. I mean, if it has some kind of action, if it has some kind of combat, like you said, it doesn't need the fucking explosions or machine guns to be an action movie. If there's some kind of fighting involved, you know what I mean, and there's a buildup to that, I would say that that's an action movie. Now, for you, Randy, one thing I did not mention, and I think Joseph kind of hinted at it a bit. Arnold had the Terminator, Stallone had Rocky and Rambo. What iconic role did Van Damme have?
Frank Dux. You're not going to call the cops. That line right there wasn't even said by him. He doesn't have an iconic role. I know he did a few Universal Soldier movies. They did that third one with Bill Goldberg, which was just terrible. Yeah, I would say, and that's the thing. I mean, we're talking about how Bloodsport is the only character that we could name that has a legacy, and it was only one movie. It wasn't a franchise. He didn't have a franchise, but what he did have that the others didn't have had a consistency in what he was doing. He knew what his apex was. He knew where not to go, where Stallone did like Rhinestone, which was a terrible comedy with Dolly Parton, and Schwarzenegger did Kindergarten Cop. Jean-Claude Van Damme always did what he knew he was good at. He didn't try to say, you know what, now I'm going to do a comedy. Now I'm going to do a buddy cop movie. I'm going to be a, whatever. He always said, I'm going to be a fighter. I know where my legacy is. I know I know where I make my bread. And he always kept it there, and he always kept it different. That's why he didn't delve into the franchises or the comedies. And that's why he kept it good. Like I said, undoubtedly Schwarzenegger and Stallone had the bigger, better career than Van Damme did. But I would put Van Damme's 1989 to 1996 against anything that those two guys did.
I'm not knocking any of the movie choices that Stallone did as far as like going into the comedy, or Arnold going into the comedy. Van Damme didn't do that. You know, he like you mentioned, he chose to do his. That doesn't have anything to do with either of our choices. Hey, what you do in your career, that's your thing. Our arguments are and I'm not trying to rain on your parade, Randy. I think maybe he you know, maybe Van Damme, you mentioned it. He did say, I'm gonna do what I know, and this is what I know. Maybe nobody offered him the chance to do something like see a comedy side. Although if you watch Street Fighter, that's a comedy kind of in itself, just because it's great. I think it's funny, you know, with Raul Julia and everybody else in it. But we're here talking about their action movies, and I gave my choices. I gave my arguments against your two picks based solely on maybe, I guess, their main roles that made them more famous were not necessarily the action role. My pick for Arnold was because it wasn't his first movie, but it's the one that defined him and gave him worldwide recognition, and that was Conan, and that was an action movie. I know they've all done action movies, but what's Arnold more recognized for? His start as Conan the Barbarian, an action movie, and it went from there. And I know he ventured into the comedy, the family comedies nowadays. He does maybe, well, you know, he hasn't really done one of those
family comedy action. Joseph, say it right. Family comedy.
This is where you tell Joseph that Conan is a fantasy movie, not an action
movie. Life is just a fantasy.
It's really hard to argue against all these. I mean, we're all just picking like why we think it's best, and I think you wouldn't have either of your choices if Arnold wasn't doing what he did first. Just like we wouldn't have Arnold if Reg Park didn't do what he did.
I think we all made three excellent choices. And granted, and just to wrap this up, I know we all selected people or action stars that we all grew up with. We saw these franchises. One of the ones we didn't mention was Michael Dudikoff as American Ninja, and there was a few others that we grew up with. China O'Brien, I think, Don the Dragon Wilson was another one. But I mean, we all grew up on this, and we were all very highly influenced on it. And I think that's why we reminisce and say, what did we like most about these movies? We're being children and watching them on the big screen and saying, wow, we know that that's impossible, but it's an escape. It's something where we could turn our brains off. We don't have to think. We just have to sit back, watch the explosions, watch the blood, watch the fighting, and watch all the chaos going on. And I think I just watched that Blockbuster documentary on Netflix, and that documentary, The Last Blockbuster, had me thinking a lot about our selections and how awesome it was when we went to rent movies, and it was like, okay, the latest action movie's out, and then we get to just shut off our brains and be kids again. And I think that's what our choices were mainly consistent of. Excellent choices. That's our show. Listeners, we'd love to hear from you. Next week, we'll be covering best 90s rock songs. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think about the show. You can reach us at formidableopponents@gmail.com, or you can follow us on Twitter at FOpponents, or on Instagram. Joseph, what's our Instagram?
It's formidable_opponents.
There you go. So now we got an Instagram. Please follow us. We'll have pictures. We'll have memes. We'll have little snippets of our old shows. Join us. We want to thank everybody. We've had a ton of new listeners this week. Our show is growing, and we'd like to hear from you guys. We're looking forward to a lot of great ventures in the near future. Maybe having some friends on as guests to have that fourth person argue with us. So we're looking forward to more listeners and your support. Please reach out to us. If you're an Apple listener, Apple Podcast, please give us a rating, 5-star, hopefully, and give us a review. We'd like to hear your honest opinion. So thank you all so much. We'll
suggest a topic.
Suggest a topic.
Yeah,
yes.
Hell, we're always looking for something.
So email us at formidableopponents@gmail.com, or let us know on Twitter or Instagram. You guys know where to find us. We'd love to hear from you. Join us next week as we argue best 90s rock songs. So for Joseph and Bob, I'm Randall. We'll see you guys next week. Thank y'all.
Zed's dead, baby. Zed's dead.